Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with Stan Lee's DC. Today, we look at the arrival of another new hero to aid in the much-anticipated crisis. He might not be the king, but he certainly looks of the sea. If you haven't read this book already, trust me, that joke's gonna kill in a minute or two. Alongside Scott McDaniel, Klaus Janson, and Guy Major, Stan recreates Aquaman. So let's see if this new version makes waves or merely flounders. The cover has our main character front and center upon some rocks. Behind him, separated by a wave of water, are images of a dolphin, some armed goons, and what could very well be a poster for that show Supernatural. This synergy with the CW is seriously getting out of hand, you guys. We begin with a man named Ramon, sitting at a desk full of science stuff and playfully debating with his girlfriend Amelia about the importance of aquatic preservation.
Nerd!
The rest of the splash page is a visualization of sea life that looks pretty amazing. Amelia, however, is kind of bored with her man's constant attention to water and thinks he could be making bigger bucks at a company, not slumming it in a houseboat. They should be shopping, partying, being all romantic, and Ramon's willing to oblige as soon as he finishes some testing. An unexpected visitor arrives. Frank, Ramon's cop brother who pretends to hold them up when he's just returning his phone, bearing lunch and exposition. A really weird lecture, too, saying their dad, also an officer, would think oceanic studies aren't as important as stopping crime, but Ramon, preferring to just do what he does, makes the valid point that crime wouldn't be much of an issue if the planet gets wrecked by pollution. Why worry about pollution? Just let your government officials handle it. I'm sure they'll be efficient and competent enough to solve any... Wait, what am I saying? Ramon respects their late father's work. He just wants to do for the aquatic environment what their dad did for people as part of the Coast Guard. He doesn't think he should lighten up in his work since his father and brother never lightened up with theirs. Frank gets a report of a break-in and takes off, leaving the young people to admire the sunset. But of course Ramon wants to talk about the water, which he dips his hand into for dramatic effect. He's got an experiment running, potentially Pulitzer Prize-worthy, about the power of water, a phrase Amelia takes as further confirmation that he may be going nuts, but they agree to change the subject and enjoy the moonlight. Considering the sun was still setting, how long did this conversation take? The next day, he takes her to the local aquarium, specifically its coral reef exhibit, because if there's anything your date will love, it's dropping hints about your secret project she's been clear on not being enthused about. She even jokes about humans not lasting underwater as long as other mammals, like whales and dolphins, because there aren't any undersea shopping malls. Well, someone's obviously never heard of Mall of Atlantis, with all those famous shops like Wet Topic, Barnacles and Noble, and Fathom 21. Where do you think the Aqualads worked for their summer jobs? That night, Ramon makes final preparations in his experiment, injecting himself with DNA from various sea creatures. I spent a year researching, studying, planning, leaving nothing to chance. Well, except for the chance that this kills you anyway. Look how he mugs for the reader as he says, "If this works, it'll be a watershed moment for the whole human race." Hey. I do the bad puns around here, mister. That's why I've got the rimshot video, the rimshot sound effect, and the shades that I slip on over my shades when I play that music sting. No, not now. Are you crazy? He calls Amelia to set up a date for the next day out on his boat, largely because her apathy for his work will finally prove useful. If someone with her disinterest is impressed, his experiment will be a success. Because it's not like any skeptics would point out that you two are romantically involved or anything. Figuring it's just another date, she agrees, just happening to have something to show him. That's either a string bikini or her terrible attempt at a balloon animal. The next day, the two are headed for the Channel Islands National Park, in such a hurry that they don't notice an incoming fax warning of recent boat hijackings in the area. After a half hour, some of which may have involved staring at Amelia's bikini bod, the scientist tells her that he's going to submerge the same way TV pundits think, without an oxygen supply. The plan is for the DNA to kick in and allow him to be underwater longer than a few minutes and surprise her. I mean, probably worry her to death first, but then the surprise. But such shenanigans must be put on hold, as Ramon notices a strange, localized green glow that seems to attract a shark.
Maybe it's his brother, like last time, bringing him his phone that he just forgot somewhere. If so, points for the elaborate and functional costume.
Ramon's escape is being slowed by the green water, messing with his head for a moment when the shark closes in, but swims off, as if deterred by the emerald phenomena. As his swimming gear sinks, Ramon sees a physical change in himself, a more literal interpretation of his namesake, though he strangely pronounces it Undersea Freak. But hey, I've just been guessing on how to pronounce his first name, so I guess we're even. Or something. Moving as if part of the water, he makes it back to the boat, wondering how he can explain this to his lady. I really like this transparent effect, it's done so nicely. Though once he leaves the water, he returns to good old flesh and blood. He wonders if his experience was the result of, well, what it obviously was in the story, or the old standard of him going cuckoo for Aqua Puffs. Don't know why he looks so sinister here, but seems glad that Amelia is so detached she noticed absolutely nothing.
Now imagine that you never encountered the shark, you didn't go into the green water, your experiment failed, and you got snagged underwater without any of that very necessary oxygen. Suddenly a disinterested girlfriend becomes a matter of life and death, doesn't it? Oy, these two are like a passive-aggressive Romeo and Juliet.
He tells her he just got bored, which Amelia finds surprising, though she does invite him to sunbathe with her. Wait, if he got sunburned, what would he look like in water form? Okay, getting off track here. He starts navigating the boat in serpentine formation, trying to find that green substance, but to no avail, and figures it's getting too dark anyway, so should just focus on his date. While they do see another boat, they get too busy making out to realize it's sailed by pirates that sneak on board. "Yarr! Will you look at that? A regular Romeo and whoever, yarr!"
Ha! Beat you to the Shakespeare reference comic from 2002 that I'm reviewing in 2019. Wait a minute.
Defending Amelia and his boat, Ramon fights back pretty effectively for a guy whose fighting skills have never been brought up before, until he's pistol whipped from behind, his hands tied behind him, and tossed overboard for not having a wallet. The instant he hits the water, he transforms again, circling back onto the boat as the pirates advance on Amelia and give those ironic comments about keeping her safe, which you know they mean something a lot worse. She jumps overboard as Ramon does the opposite, finding that bullets don't hurt him and he can shoot water with the intensity of a bullwhip. In attack, he launched instinctively, leading the pirates to retreat. As he signals an alert to the Coast Guard, he remembers that the girlfriend he took out to the middle of the ocean isn't a great swimmer and goes after her. He gets her out of the water just in time, as the law officers arrive, and the seafaring felons doubt the wisdom of talking about being chased off by a dude made of el agua. "We've been looking for you, boys. Afraid you're about to be beached for a while."
I had to give him that rim shot. The line was a lot more clever than anything I was going to come up with.
Driving Amelia home, Ramon attributes her rescue to the Coast Guard, but can't figure out a way to tell her about his newfound powers without someone ending up in an asylum. Later testing his skills at the aquarium, he instinctively utters the perfect name for his form, Aquaman. Not only can he change at will, even outside water, he can alter the pressure of his water jets, enough to simply blind foes or focused enough to cut metal. Yeah, I'm sure the aquarium will be fine with their displays being damaged like that. He can solidify specific parts of his body while the rest remains water, though it doesn't seem he can pass through small spaces like a chain-link fence. It's after testing his speed and swiftness that he reverts to human form and begins sulking that he's turned himself into a freak, which isn't what he wanted.
Maybe he was secretly hoping that these powers would also make him as ripped as Jason Momoa. Do you even lift Aqua, bro?
You know, I hate it when you do impressions of me, brah!
Shut up!
At first I kind of want to smack this guy for getting all weepy at having superpowers, but I guess such a radical change all of a sudden can be kind of disheartening. Maybe if it was paced a little slower, a few more panels to show a transition from thrill to more scared realization, that would have been a powerful scene and made the image of him sunk to the floor all the more impactful, if you ask me. Unable to keep this secret corked, he goes to his brother, even if they don't always agree, and sneaks up on him while he's restoring a car, looking about as creepy and villainous as he did earlier. Is this an after effect of his powers or what? And this slightly lit shot really doesn't help matters either. They drive off to discuss what the deal is, not knowing they're being followed. As they reach the Palo Verde Reservoir, Frank wants his little brother to spill what's going on, and when they get out, he transforms. Not sure why they couldn't do this at Frank's place. He might have had a first aid kit for when the pirates from earlier do a drive-by, hitting the elder brother in the leg before driving off because they've made their point.
So, what, did both Ramon and Amelia choose not to file a report? How did these criminals, the ones that the officer even said they were looking for, meaning they committed other crimes, not get locked up? For that matter, how did they know to follow the guy that they held up? Did they just guess that there was a connection between the nerd and the water guy? For more of that matter, why did they shoot with the intent of hitting the guy made of water when that proved so ineffective before? Why do I have to ask these questions?
After this transgression, Aquaman isn't going to settle for getting their license plate.
No one messes with my brother!
He pursues them on a splash page with some great dynamic angling, propelling himself, and more or less repeating an earlier analogy, this time water through a hose instead of a tube. And what is a hose except a tube? Ramon zips past other cars. One occupant asks what they're advertising, which is weird since he looks like a kid. Don't know any kids that would be asking that in such a situation, but anyway. The pirates take a turn too tightly and crash into the back of a garbage truck. Now, here's a head-scratcher. Stan uses a caption to say Scott McDaniel's art is too good to necessitate a caption. This feels like one of those philosophical questions that's not supposed to have an answer. Moving on, Aquaman won't shed any tears at the loss of these cretins, and reverts to human form before anyone can see, just in time to tell the driver of the truck that he didn't see a thing.
But the man did get pretty suspicious when Ramon turned, winked, and gave a thumbs up to a camera that wasn't really there.
Later at the local hospital, Ramon passes a pair of officers who mention how Frank, one of the best, will never walk again. So the little brother tries to be cheery and jokey about the matter, and Frank tells him to knock it off. Regardless of what the medics say, he will walk again. By the heavy dramatics of the dialogue, you'd think these characters thought that one shot to the leg necessitated a double amputation. Don't get me wrong, it's bad, and needing that one-handed crutch will slow him down enough that his role on the force will change, but I can't help but feel like Barbara Gordon would be a little offended by this. But Ramon feels really guilty, because as it turns out, he never pressed charges against those killers, so I guess they killed other people before, and he was concerned about himself. Frank tells him to knock off the waterworks. My pun, not theirs. And, things happen, and he wants him to elaborate on the whole turning into water thing. After Ramon promises to use his power to fight crime while Frank is on the mend, a speech even Stan is apparently willing to admit is corny, he delves into details we already know.
Okay, so he chose not to press charges, and for whatever reason, Amelia chose the same. But there was a bulletin about these guys. The cops said they were looking for them. That means that they knew that these were the guys that were committing all these crimes at sea. Are those crimes being investigated? Am I missing something about California maritime law, or did these guys just have a really good lawyer on retainer?
Still stupid of him not to press charges after they tried to kill him and threatened his girlfriend. But I guess he was just so focused on his powers for a couple of days. Okay, moving on before this makes me rage out. We jump ahead a few weeks with Frank Raymond determined to regain his mobility as he walks past the Church of Eternal Empowerment, and hears a sermon going on. Reverend Dark speaks of power as the ultimate goal. Do you not call the Creator himself the All-Powerful? That's more of a veiled reference to God, so I don't think Batman's going to count it. If he's inexplicably listening, that is. Anyway, the faux preacher says only he can guide them to infinite power, and Frank thinks he's full of it. But the hooded parishioners eat it up, like they were hypnotized. Both Dark and Morgana sense a non-believer, so the former freezes time. That's definitely a new one. Just like the aura of light shooting from his fingertips that pinpoints Frank. Isn't he all about darkness? Why aura of light? Well, he stops Morgana from destroying him since he's merely a harbinger of a greater threat, so no hurting the cop till they learn more. Another one of those typos. I'm beginning to wonder if I'm the one making the mistake. Anyway, he heads to the houseboat to tell Ramon and Amelia about his experience, and the new superhero jokes about LA being the perfect place for weirdness. I also noticed that after Amelia complimented Frank's improvement, his reply is mistakenly directed to Ramon. This goes on as they're watched by the villains, Morgana not particularly impressed with any of them, but the Reverend tells his beauteous right hand one possesses power. I can't tell if he thinks she's hot because she doesn't wear clothes, or because they talk the same way. To prove what she's learned from him, LaFay orders a bunch of goons to go after the one with the green power, and threatening the price of failure.
Yes, she's learned well to tell other people to do her bidding. A hearty lesson, ordering random dorks to attack superheroes they have no hope of defeating. Dark's just being lazy and having his assistant do stuff, isn't he?
While Ramon helps with his brother's physical therapy, Amelia is off to party solo at Club 52. Gonna just brush that off as a coincidence. They basically reaffirm their love despite their differences, and she leaves, just in time for a new, danger-sensing power to emerge. Kinda like the instinct of some fish. I guess Halibut senses tingling wasn't gonna catch on. That's when he sees empowerment cultists grab his brother and start beating him for answers as to where the other is. So Aquaman hops on board and starts mopping the floor with them. None of the cloaked goons' attacks are doing any good. They can't grab him, and their guns are, of course, useless. It's like shooting through water!
No, it just is shooting through water. Moron! How can Frank be concerned about Dark's influence when his thrall is this stupid?
Ram calls it quits when one of them puts a gun to Frank's head and they board their boat, ignoring the clear opportunities to escape when a gun isn't at Frank's noggin, and they head out to sea. Angling for greater rewards from Dark, they demand to know their foe's origins as they apparently think they can tie him up. After a snarky threat/introduction, his bro is threatened further. For all I know, that crummy cloaked creep may mean what he says. Gee, you think?
Clearly, messing around with animal DNA from the sea and injecting it into his body has screwed up Ramon's brain. First, he doesn't press charges against people that tried to kill him, and now he's questioning if different people really want to kill his brother. He's supposed to be a scientist, right?
Doing something he probably could have tried before they were abducted, Aquaman takes careful aim to knock the gun away, leaving the brothers to do some old-fashioned family butt-whooping. Later, the henchmen arrive at a dock where their master waits, and he asks about the prisoners. "Speak, you insignificant piece of human flotsam!" Hey, even Dominic's getting into the water puns. All that's left is a small puddle, so the Rev orders Morgana to dispose of them. I mean, it's harsh, but it wasn't exactly smart of that guy to simply point at some water instead of saying, "We fought a dude made of water." As Ramon surprises Amelia at the club, Frank is at home, gazing up into the stars, musing on the dark forces seeking his brother out, inexorably tied to him. But he doesn't want to be a killjoy because Rob is as happy as a lark?
I noticed this very same thing in his bio from Secret Files and Origins. If that's not a typo, it raises the question of how Rob is shorthand for Ramon.
On the Street begins with Frank in his captain's office, angry for being stuck at a desk and making such a great case for being put back on active duty by using his crutch to swipe off all the paperwork, family photos, and more. Despite his confidence and rights for handicapped people, the Cap can't send out a cop whose injury could get someone killed, and that's the final word. Even recalling the good old days before promotions doesn't work, and between the two of them, they settle on a possibility. On the LAPD's dime, Frank will take some vacation time in Paris, where he learned they have certain programs and methods for the inclusion of the disabled. Observe these policies, and if the report he comes back with is convincing enough, the captain will give it some thought.
Awful nice of the ranking officer that just had one of his men screw up his desk, throw stuff around, just because he was being a leader and doing his job.
3 days later, Frank is on a plane to France, but his flight isn't off to the best start. He's between two acolytes of Reverend Dark, who's pegged the cop as a threat to be eliminated prior to the much-discussed crisis. I guess the department didn't want to spring for first class. They make a crack that a cripple couldn't possibly be a threat to anyone, so Frank cracks them back, in the face, and other body parts, with his crutch. They pull some ray guns from a 1950s B-movie? Okay, but I doubt it'll do much good, as a bunch of passengers and a flight attendant get all up in their faces, figuring that if a handicapped dude, the JLA, and those brave souls who came before us can make a difference, so can they.
We're in an airplane setting. This was published in 2002, and that mustachioed gentleman's remarks are a pretty clear indicator this was done in honor of those we lost on 9/11. So to everyone that worked on this story, good on you.
And while it could just be my imagination, the stewardess and the guys on each side of her in the front of the group appear to be drawn to intentionally resemble real-life people. Who, I can't say, but I could be thrown off by the art style too. Frank knocks their weapons away, and the other passengers take their turns, knocking the thugs into submission. And I must say, it's a wonderful sight to behold. They land a few hours later, Frank promising the cretins their master will be locked up eventually, before meeting with a police chief. Frank came to observe their methods, but after hearing the pilot's account, Le Chief thinks Frank's methods deserve study on their own, despite his handicap. The suggestion of turning the prisoners over to the JLA is out of the question since, they're in France, and I'm not sure the team has a jail cell in that magical Yggdrasil forest anyway. The chief thinks that if the team's efforts extend outside America, then perhaps their A should change to E for Earth. He's also skeptical as to whose interests they have at heart. Frank is certain the JLA works for everyone, but he can't say anything because that'd mean, for some reason, revealing his brother is Aquaman, which I don't think makes a whole lot of sense since we never saw Ramon admitted to the team. In any event, the elder Raymond brother decides to stay in France to keep an eye on his assailants, and help however he can in the looming crisis. The story ends with the two driving into the city proper, as the chief compliments the Americans' tenacity.
That concludes Stan Lee's Aquaman. It was definitely a fun ride, some of the dialogue a bit more polished than some of the previous stories, but it definitely had some logical hiccups.
Maybe if we saw Ramon get a summons to appear in court, or have him choose not to press charges and throw in some kind of rational reason, I could have better accepted the whole drive-by scene and his feelings of guilt. I mean, it doesn't explain how those crooks were freed anyway. That's still perplexing. Not as much as shooting a guy made of water just to make a point. If they had intended to shoot Frank simply because he was associating with the hero, that would have made more sense and validated Ramon's feelings of responsibility. Amelia didn't really do much, and sometimes she seemed a little too vapid for my taste, but the idea of these two together, despite their differing interests, them seeming to have genuine feelings for each other, at the very least has potential for a fun relationship to watch, if it were elaborated the right way.
Dominic Dark kind of dropped the evil ball here. At no point does he specify who has the power he wants, which is a disadvantage for his minions. If you want to say that because Morgana ordered them, it's her fault, well, Dark doesn't have her killed, so he's still a moron.
You'd think that given everything these two can do and have seen, they wouldn't be so dismissive of the implication of that puddle. Yeah, it was dumb of the goon not to outright say what they thought, but you'd think the evil mastermind would have been curious as to what he meant. After all, he was looking for someone with power, right? On the Street was a little shaky itself, with Frank getting away with conduct that'd get anyone else suspended, if not fired, I'm sure, and him deciding to stay in France just to watch two henchmen? Sure, they might say something eventually, but the information could be relayed to him by the chief, couldn't it? Beyond that, there may be extradition laws because of the fact that the plane was still in the air at the time of the arrest, so maybe the American legal system might have some sway, but I'm not 100% sure. All in all, it felt like a tactic a TV show might use to write off a character because the actor is either leaving or getting fired. But it was the ordinary citizens coming together to stop a threat that was the real heart of this one. Yeah, the dialogue was a little cheesy, and the result was rosier than real life. but it was about the positivity and optimism, righteousness and community to make you feel good rather than dwell on the negative or unfortunate circumstances. And for that, the story deserves kudos.
And it goes without saying that Scott McDaniel and accompanying artists did stellar work. Colors were vibrant, and the translucent effect for Aquaman's form were great. Next week, we diverge from the traditionally iconic heroes to one that's been known to catwalk the line. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.